If you are not watching Industry on HBO, I don't know what you're doing. It's one of the best shows out right now. I just think it's absolutely incredible. But if you are watching it, please keep listening to my video because I wanted to talk about Harper and Eric's relationship on the show. It's a conversation that I'm not seeing happen, to be quite honest. When I watch any reviews or commentary about the show as a whole, I don't see much discussion around Harper and Eric's dynamic and what it means not only for the show itself, but what it means for Black characters and Asian characters in film, television, cinema, blase blase, whatever you like to say. So I really love everything about their relationship as characters. And what I found so exciting about their casting is that so rarely do we see an Asian man and a young Black woman allied. Now, when the reasons for their allying become quite dubious, understand that at that point they're no longer, let's say, allies for true, because the circumstances of it are now dubious, but still important. Asian men and young Black girls have a very complex relationship in America. Industry is a BBC production, so it's not made for an American audience. It's made across the, river. It's made in Europe. London or the UK. I never know which one, but those areas. But an American audience is watching, right? And as a young Black woman, some of my first introductions to Asian people, just as a group, was hearing about Latasha Harlins. And if you're not familiar with Latasha Harlins, please just Google what happened. It's a lot. And yeah, I would be very interested in hearing how the actress understands Harper's relationship with Eric. Because at first, right, Eric is really Harper's ally. He's her champion, dare I say. He's her protector. But then he becomes not a total enemy, right? But he definitely becomes a potential threat and dangerous to Harper. And in the end, even after all of that, right? Even after the scene where he locks the door and is screaming Shorty down, Harper chooses that relationship, okay? Harper chooses that relationship. And as a woman, I feel that the show wanted you to believe that Harper would align herself with her womanhood first and create a force with Sarah and Daria. But Harper is a Black woman, so she's Black first and must do all that she can to protect herself. And I wonder if this was always an intention of the script or if this has to do with the actress's interpretation of her character. Either way, I think it's a beautiful subplot here. So even if this means, and I'd argue that mostly non-Black viewers, think that's what's happening here. So even if that means betraying her womanhood because Eric locked her in a room, okay, right? And he's a man. That's intimidation. That's frightening. Even if he wasn't a man, it's still intimidation. It's still frightening, but they're making a point, right, to have his character be a male character. And he's her boss, but he's also kind of her mentor. So it's very messed up, right? But Eric, I just want to bring it back home. Eric is Asian. And how many Asian characters do we receive in season 1? How many of their peers are Asian? How many Asian coworkers? You know what I'm saying? Like, there's really no Asian characters. So Eric told her he had to do a lot to get Harper there. And we know why. Like, as an audience watching, right, when Harper has the whole, like, issue with her transcripts and they're, like, getting nosy, you know, and we see that she really had to do and take some alternative methods to get herself to peer point, but she got there regardless of the merit of what she is capable of doing, and I think that's fair. And obviously, you know, Harper having to use those alternative methods to get into peer point, and the show illustrating that, I think was really great, because some people do have to do that, and that is the reality. But it also shows that, like, see how silly this whole thing is, like, Harper didn't need to go to a Yale or a Buxton or whatever. Like, Harper just needs to know how to do that job, right? Harper just needs to know and needs to be proficient enough to trade. And she is. So who cares where she went to college, or who cares whatever else she might want to do with herself professionally, as long as she's not harming people, right? Like, she can do the job just like y'all. So it really shouldn't be a surprise when Harper aligns herself with Eric in the end, because they're having an entirely different experience than their peers. And there's a lot to unpack, right? There's the classism, there's the racism, sexism, the nationality. Like, Harper, what I love too, Harper is the American of the show, right, of the characters. And so she's an immigrant. And the show actually mentions this a lot. And this is another point. It's another subplot. And there's another point I don't think it's discussed enough when people are analyzing the show or giving their critique of the script. But I don't know, whatever. I think it's very important. So, Harper is an immigrant. And I think it's really interesting and brilliant how the show is always kind of bringing this up, because she's Black, she's the American, she's in Europe, and right, Europe, like all of the European characters and the character of Europe itself is always telling Harper and reminding her that, like, you're not supposed to be here. But it's like, okay, but why am I here though? All right, exactly. Like, so, but she's a good immigrant, right? There's also a lot of comments about that, like, some of the characters will make these really, like, flippant one-off comments to Harper about, well, like, at least you're smart, or at least you're good at this, or whatever. And it's like, okay. But, Eric and Harper's relationship, to me, is the most complex dynamic of the series. It is. It's the most complex dynamic of the series. I don't care. I haven't watched season 2 yet, so I'm very excited for season 2. And I want to do a more proper, in-depth video about Asian American characters and Black female characters, and the very limited interactions we see them have on screen. Because I think it's fascinating. Like, I think it's fascinating. Like, I really do think it's fascinating. I think the show is doing a great job of exploring that dynamic, and also having a broader discussion of what does it really look like to be in solidarity with one another when you are non-white, right? What does that solidarity look like for all non-white peoples who are, for the sake of argument, right, or for the sake of whatever, let's just deal with the show's politics and dynamics and setups and conversations. What does that solidarity look like amongst non-white people who are trying to fight back against the woes of the world, right, that have kept them from accessing what they actually have access to now en masse, right? En masse. So, I think it's wonderful. If you are not watching this show on HBO, you need to be watching it. Industry on HBO is one of the most exciting shows I've seen in a long time, and I really love that the main character is a young Black woman who is incredible at what she does, and she's working in a field that we don't often see Black women working in television or cinema or anything like that, right? She's working at I don't know, but it's a money show, right? It's about money. They're like on Wall Street, but they're in the UK. And it's really great. It's a really great show. So please watch it. It's not often that we get Black female characters who are expressing their womanhood their femininity, their intellect in this way. And I think the show is actually handling the character of Harper very well in her growth development all through season 1. Like, she's not just the black girl. And actually, when you first start watching the show, they set it up really well for you to think, just whatever, watch it. And you'll see why Harper is a really awesome character. And I just really like that she gets to be the center of attention in this show. And regardless of what she's going through as a character, she is still a representation of a black woman that we haven't really seen before, who we know exists. We know, like, in theory, this woman exists, like, in the real world. Maybe not exactly like the character. Of course, the character is a dramatization, but a black woman who works at, like an investment firm or on Wall Street, and a woman in that space does exist. Who is this young, but what does that look like, right? How do you navigate that? And then for the show to give her a mentor, who's this older Asian man, was another, like, wow, this show is thinking. Like, that's how I felt. This show is thinking, and the show wants its audience to think about how we are all interacting with each other. Asian men and black women really aren't often seen, like, paired on television, and I love that they're doing it in this mentor-mentee way, but I also like that they're not making it, all rosy and kumbaya. They are showing where those schisms are in our relationship, right? Like, the relationship that I spoke about earlier that I was really kind of first introduced to when it came to Asian men and black girls was not a good one, right? And just the Asian community in general. And I don't think that was okay either, right? But that's just, you know what I mean? Like, annoyingly and frustratingly so, and upsettingly so, that's how a lot of us get introduced to different groups of people, right? We only see the polarizing bad thing, and it gets exasperated to this is the truth about the whole group. And that's not often the case. It's really not the case. But anyway, I think the show does a really good job at exploring what that relationship is like, because Eric, just as Harper is a very flawed character, but watching him have this sort of internal battle of, like, all right, I'm also a non-white person. Here's this brilliant other non-white person, right? She's an American, so she's an immigrant over here. I know she's worked her behind off. I also know she probably had a finesse to get in here, because the show alludes that Eric also kind of finessed his way into Pierpoint. The show, like, doesn't say it as overtly as it does about Harper. I mean, they literally show us how Harper finesses her way into Pierpoint, but they don't really show us or get into it with Eric. Now, again, I haven't watched season 2 yet, so they might go a little bit more into detail, but they do allude to, Eric also might have gotten his gig at Pierpoint through finesse, just through pure talent and skill. And I also think that's another just, like, undercurrent of the show in as a whole is, does meritocracy matter? Should we really just be allowing people to do things off of skill and talent alone, right? Like, how actually, yes, we should, to an extent. Let me explain. Okay. Basically, like, right, Harper at Pierpoint because Harper just is good at this stuff. But right, technically on paper, she should have never been accepted into their incoming class. And she should never have been given a permanent position, right? Like, on paper, she's not a candidate that they would ever accept. But she's the very best, you know? Like, she's actually, like, the very best candidate. She's the top of the top, the creme de la creme. There's something about Harper that nobody else is capable of doing in their industry. And yes, she's a young Black woman. So you know what, everybody? You're going to have to just take a deep breath and go on about your day. You know, like, what? Like, what? And Eric has felt that himself, being an Asian man and being at Pierpoint and being in the country that they are in, right? So watching him have this internal struggle of like, how do I mentor this young woman, but also keep my own biases at bay, and also my patriarchy, right? Like how do I keep all of that not into our stuff? Because that scene where he locks him in the room, right, and he's getting all freaked out about the investigation and, you know, what's going on, and his client not getting back, you know, all of this stuff, right? And he's being very intimidating, being frightening, being loud, being violent in action, and notices it though, right? Like, he goes on his tirade for sure, but he has a moment where he looks because he sees Harper look at the door because it's locked, and he stops and unlocks the door and looks at Harper, I would say very apologetically, but really looks at himself like, oh, I'm horrible. You know, like, oh, that was a horrible, horrible thing to do right now. And it's also not something I wanted to do to this person. I do think Eric, deep down, I think as an audience, we are supposed to know that, at least by the end of season 1, I think deep down as an audience, we are supposed to know that Eric really does have a deep respect and admiration for Harper and struggles with that, for sure. He struggles with that in general, but he also struggles with his own continued feelings, right, of insecurity and feeling like he still is having to fight to prove himself at this place that he has made so great. You know, like, yes, everyone does their part, but I think we're supposed to look at Eric and Harper really as mirrors of each other and opportunities for both to be better. And they're seeing, right, all of their flaws and messy behavior through one another. The show was just very clever in making Harper a Black woman and Eric an Asian man. I really think it adds a lot more texture and excitement to the individual character narratives and the dynamic. So I'm excited for season 2. I am. I know I've been like kind of saying the same things, saying different things, but just like, y'all, I'm going to give you guys a proper video about this, but I had to get these thoughts off because I really love these characters and love this show. And I really want more Black women to watch this show. I need more Black women to watch this show. I'm telling y'all, you need to see and hear and really see and hear and feel the character of Harper. I think this is a groundbreaking character right now for us. And I hope you watch the show and get just as excited about it as me. Okay.